The first time Sophia held her son, she expected tears of joy. Instead she felt only weight and quiet. Little fingers curled around her thumb. A soft blanket smelled of lavender and baby powder. Robert, the billionaire, stood nearby, pale and polite. He smiled like rich men do, measured, careful. "He's perfect," Robert said, but his voice trembled. Inside him, something else stirred. Fear. Hope tangled together. They named him Michael. His dark hair lay like a soft river on his little head. Sophia pressed her cheek to his and listened. No cry. A nurse checked his ears. "All fine," she said. "He's strong." The doctors were kind and clinical. Tests. Reassuring words. Still, Sophia felt the quiet like a question. Days slipped into a strange pattern. Michael slept. Michael nursed. Michael watched the world with eyes that never registered color. They said he blinked at light. He tracked movement. But when Sophia hummed lullabies, he did not startle. When Robert spoke gently, Michael did not turn. The doctors used calm terms, delayed responses, sensory issues. They offered solutions and appointments and small, hopeful smiles. Sophia's heart beat a little faster at each clinic visit. The word blind hovered like a shadow they refused to say. Could they be wrong? Maybe a fluke? Maybe a test missed something? Then Evelyn arrived. Evelyn was the new maid, not polished, not rehearsed. She walked into the house with steady shoes and hands that had worked hard for years. Her bag had a dent, a faded photograph tucked inside. She smelled of bread and street rain. Robert hired her for practical reasons: efficiency, discretion. He did not expect her to notice the small things. On her first night, Evelyn went into Michael's room to fold a tiny sweater. She paused and watched the baby breathe. She hummed a tune under her breath. Michael's fingers twitched. Evelyn smiled softly and began to speak. "Hi, little one," she whispered. "Can you hear me?" She asked not like a doctor, not like a worried parent. She asked like someone who had known silence and had learned to listen anyway. Evelyn sat on the edge of the crib. She began to move, slowly, tapping the wooden rail in a rhythm, clapping softly, then patting the mattress. She made small household noises, a spoon against a bowl, the rustle of paper. The sounds were ordinary. The reaction was not. Michael turned his head. For the first time since birth, his eyes tracked a sound. Evelyn stiffened. Sophia, across the room, felt a sudden squeeze in her chest. She moved closer without making a sound. Robert watched, palms sweating. Evelyn continued. She sang a line in a language none of them recognized. She spoke with her hands, not just her voice, tracing shapes in the air. Michael's fingers reached. He grasped the air like it was the most precious thing. "Did you see that?" Sophia whispered, voice brittle. The question hung in the nursery like a fragile glass bell. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She closed her eyes. She listened to the quiet in a way the house had forgotten how to. Then she said, "He hears, but he does not see. Not yet." The words were soft. They landed like a pebble in a still pond. Robert's face tightened. The doctors had said something else. How could she be sure? Evelyn explained, simply, without medical jargon, that sometimes, when a baby's visual world is blocked early, other senses either shut down or become confused. She said there were stories she had heard long ago, of children whose sight returned when someone taught their other senses to trust. "Can we help him?" Sophia asked. Her voice broke open. "Can we make him see?" Evelyn's eyes held a slow, honest light. "We can try," she said. "But we must listen. And wait. And be patient." A pause followed. The silence in the nursery felt different now. Not empty. Not resigned. It hummed with possibility. Outside the window, the city lights blurred into halos. Inside, hands reached across the crib, not to take, but to teach. Robert looked as though his world might tilt. Sophia held Michael a little closer. Evelyn sat, folded the sweater, and began to plan in her head the small things she would do tomorrow. At the doorway, a shadow lengthened. A visitor was coming in the morning. Someone who knew more than kindness or wealth. Someone whose arrival would flip open a locked drawer. But for now, they listened. They waited. They moved like cautious fishermen, casting lines into unknown water. Will their efforts pull something miraculous from the hush? Or will the hush remain? The question hangs. Who will knock at their door tomorrow, and which secret will that visitor carry? Michael's world was a soft, unlit room. For him, textures spoke louder than faces. Silk and cotton and the scratch of a tag knew him better than names. Evelyn understood this without schooling. She began with what she had: rhythm, scent, and touch. Each morning she carried a basket. Inside, a bell, dried lavender, a wooden ring, and a small mirror wrapped in cloth. The mirror was not for sight, she told herself. It was for reflection, to coax movement, to teach Michael that things could be more than silence. "Good morning, Michael," she sang on day one, voice low and steady. The house was big. Her words were small. She began tapping the bell in a slow pattern. Ding. Pause. Ding ding. Michael listened. His chest rose. His head turned. Again, Evelyn urged softly. She had a way with questions. "Do you like that sound?" She'd ask him, not expecting an answer. Sometimes she would ask, "What does the bell feel like?" as if he could reply. The questions were teaching tools. They were invitations to pay attention. Sophia watched these lessons like someone watching a fragile plant. She learned to read the tiny changes: a tightened hand, a softer exhale, a small smile that lit up the curve of Michael's mouth. Robert observed too, though he kept his hands in his pockets and his face still. He bought gadgets and sensors, modern solutions for an ancient problem. He scheduled specialists. He asked Evelyn once, in a clipped voice, "Do you think this will work?" Evelyn answered honestly. "I don't know," she said. "But being present helps." They did what they could. They dimmed the lights in the nursery so shadows became softer. They filled cloth bags with familiar smells: baked bread, rosemary, lemon peel, and let Michael hold them. Sometimes he would breathe in deeply and relax like a child sinking into a warm bed. Other times he would clench his fists and cry until Sophia's arms ached. There were small victories. One afternoon, Evelyn tied a bell to a mobile and spun it gently. Michael raised his hand and reached. His fingers grazed the bell and it sang. His face changed, not with sight, but with recognition. He began to expect sounds. He began to anticipate. Is anticipation the same as hope? Sophia asked Evelyn one evening. The house hummed with the distant thrum of machines. Evelyn looked up, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "They're cousins. Hope is louder." Robert listened, but he did not always understand. He grew frustrated on days when Michael's progress seemed small. He demanded more tests. He wanted answers framed like contracts: guaranteed, deliverable. Evelyn shook her head once and said, "You cannot order a child to see like you order a car." At night, when the house emptied of bustle, Sophia sat in the nursery with Michael on her lap and asked him questions as if he could tell her what he wanted. "Do you hear the rain?" she would whisper. "Can you feel the moon?" She wanted to know what colors the darkness had for him. Evelyn taught them games. She played hide and seek with a soft toy, letting it peek from behind her hand. She traced shapes on Michael's palm: circle, square, triangle, and said the names aloud. She pressed a warm spoon against his forehead and then a cool one, and watched how his brow moved. One afternoon, Evelyn decided to try something different. She sat on the rug and drew a small map on paper, then folded it into a plane and set it flying over Michael's crib. The movement made a soft whoosh. Michael watched the air. He reached. His hand motioned like a little compass finding north. That night, Sophia whispered into Robert's ear, "Do you ever imagine what it would feel like to be inside his head?" Robert was quiet. He pictured a world of numbers and contracts and perfect angles, then tried to imagine sand and sounds and scents. He could not. Evelyn's lessons were slow. They were patient, stubborn, like a river carving stone. She taught not to press, but to invite. She taught them to speak in rhythms, slow, clear, repeated. She taught them to be honest when progress was small and to celebrate noise when it came. At the end of each day, they gathered by Michael's crib and waited for a reaction. Sometimes there was laughter, small and surprising. Sometimes there was a scream that tightened Sophia's throat. But always there was something, an inch forward, a pause that felt like a held breath. And as they sat, each person in the room felt something shifting. Not a miracle, not yet. Something subtler, a recognition that the child within that crib was a presence, not a problem. A person, not a diagnosis. But one evening, Evelyn found a note tucked under the nursery door. It was folded twice, edges creased by hands that had read it many times. The handwriting was hurried. Meet me at the conservatory at dawn. I have seen this before. Who would send such a note to a house that had everything? Who had the courage to say, I have seen this before? The question burned like a match. Who will arrive at dawn, and what secret will they bring about Michael's silence? Dawn arrived like a breath. Rain had stopped in the night, and the garden was washed clean. The conservatory glass beaded with droplets that caught the weak light and threw it back like tiny stars. Evelyn kept watch with Michael asleep in his sling against her chest. She clutched the note until the paper softened. A woman stood by the glass, framed by ferns and the smell of damp earth. She looked older than she was, not by years but by everything she had weathered. Her name, when she spoke, was Emma. Her voice was the kind of low that had seen both joy and pain and still kept singing. You sent the note, Robert said, appearing beside Evelyn. His suit was damp. He had not slept well. His eyes were red not always from lack of rest but from worry. Emma smiled with no pretense. I used to visit a child like him, she said. Years ago. In a village that had no doctors and plenty of stubborn mothers. The child could not see either. Sophia tightened her hold on Michael. What happened? She asked, though her heart already feared the answer. Emma's hands folded in front of her, the way people fold when they're about to tell a long, true story. We taught him to trust sound and touch, but most importantly, we taught him to reach. Not at first for sight, but for the idea of cause and effect. He learned that the world would respond when he acted. Robert's brow furrowed. This sounded like folklore. This sounded like hope. He wanted facts. Emma knew that. She did not offer statistics. She offered a method. She offered days of repetition, stories told aloud, rhythms that matched breathing. She offered a toy that was more a ritual than a toy, a small wooden horse that made a soft neigh when rocked. Evelyn led them into the conservatory, and they sat in a circle. The plants leaned in like audience members. Emma took Michael into her lap with the tenderness of someone who knew how fragile trust could be. She placed a tiny bell within his reach, then tapped it once, twice. She watched his attention like a gardener watches a seedling. Children who lack sight are not empty spaces, Emma murmured. They're maps with roads erased. We redraw the roads. She tied a thin ribbon to Michael's wrist and attached the other end to the wooden horse. When she moved the horse, Michael felt a tug. His fingers tightened. A small gasp escaped Sophia. You tied the sound to the movement, Robert said, a new respect in his voice. He was beginning to see the logic, simple and elegant. Emma nodded. Make one sense prove to him that the other exists. Let movement make noise and noise make movement. Let the body remember cause and effect. They followed her instructions for days. They made a language of small rituals. Each morning a bell chimed at exactly 9. At noon, they brushed Michael's hair with a soft brush in a pattern he could predict. At night, they whispered the same poem about a star and a river. Michael's reactions grew. A giggle slipped out one afternoon when Sophia swayed a mobile that clicked like tiny dishes. It was a sound that landed like a pebble in everyone's chest. They celebrated like people who have been waiting years for a single sunrise. But progress was not a straight line. There were setbacks. One rainy evening, Michael began to arch and cry like the world was too loud. They tried to soothe him. Nothing worked. Evelyn stayed up with him, humming until the night felt less sharp. She placed her cheek to his and asked him silent questions. Are you frightened? Are you alone? Some nights, Robert could not watch. He retreated to his study and looked at numbers and charts and the parts of his life that obeyed logic. He ordered one study after another, tests that promised clarity but delivered only more data. The doctors remained polite, useful, and baffled. He wanted certainty. He didn't have it. One afternoon, while following Emma's gentle exercises, Michael reached for the mirror in a new way. His hand closed on the glass, then on the reflection of his own tiny fist. For a long moment, he stared at his reflection as if meeting a stranger. Then his mouth opened into a smile that broke like sun through clouds. Sophia felt tears sting her eyes. Did you see that? She asked, the question a small prayer. Emma smiled and shrugged like people who had expected nothing less from stubborn children. He met himself, she said simply. Not sight yet, but recognition. That night, as they settled and Michael slept with the ribbon tied to the horse, there was a knock. A soft, deliberate knock on the big mahogany door. Robert answered. A man stood there with a worn envelope and a look like he had been carrying news for a long time. He handed Robert the envelope and said, "This is about your wife's family. It's about the hospital records. You should know." Robert frowned and took the paper. The conservatory hummed with a sudden, sharp edge. Sophia looked at the envelope like it had teeth. Inside were pages from a hospital, old, yellowed with time. Names. Dates. A note in the margin, possible medication error. Note sensory response. The room felt smaller. What had been buried in ink and paper now nudged at their foundation. Questions that had been quiet in their minds now had voices. What did the hospital records reveal, and how will the truth change everything? The papers smelled of dust and time. Robert spread them on his desk like a man trying to assemble a story from scattered bones. The handwriting in the margins was a brittle thing, impatient and apologetic at once. There were dates and names, nurses and notes about medication schedules. One line repeated itself in a shaky script: review vision medication, possible delayed effect. Sophia sat at the edge of the desk. Her hands trembled. "Why haven't we been told?" she asked, though she suspected the answer. Wealth did not guarantee truth. It only bought convenience and silence. The man who had delivered the envelope, an old records clerk, had said little. He shuffled away into the rain, as if the swamp of bureaucracy had finally spat out what it had swallowed. Evelyn stood by the window, hands clasped, the light making a corona around her simple shapes. Emma read the papers slowly, as if each word raised a small stone from the bottom of a river. There were medications used then that are not used now, she said. Some babies showed delayed responses. The hospital may have misattributed symptoms. Robert's jaw clenched. "How many?" he demanded. His voice was the sound of a man being stripped of certainty. Emma's eyes were steady. Enough to worry. Enough to ask questions. They called the hospital. Names, hold music, polite apologies. The record keeper who answered was young and apologetic. He promised to look up more. It was the kind of promise that either meant nothing or everything. Hours turned into days of phone calls and legal consultations. Robert, who usually reserved anger for spreadsheets, now focused it on bureaucracy. He wanted a re-examination, a statement, someone to be held accountable. Sophia wanted to know if something had been done to Michael that could be fixed. Evelyn wanted the truth, simple and brutal. Emma wanted the child to be the center of attention, not the papers. Then a nurse arrived. Her name was Lila. She had hands that trembled in the way people's hands tremble when they carry guilt. She looked like someone who had been saving regrets in an old drawer. "I worked there," she said, voice small. "We were understaffed. They told us to follow protocols, but sometimes the protocols were wrong. I'm sorry." Her apology was not an explanation. It was a plea. She handed them a small plastic folder with more notes, more signatures. In the margins, a different name appeared, a physician no longer practicing at that hospital. He had been responsible for a trial of a medication meant to help newborn sensory development. It had been discontinued after a cluster of odd cases. Sophia read aloud, "Possible overexposure to sedative after delivery. Patient showed diminished startle reflex. Recommend long-term sensory therapy." Robert's knuckles went white. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" he demanded, voice tight with accusation and a fear that was suddenly personal. Lila's eyes filled. "We feared lawsuits," she whispered. "We feared losing our licenses. We were small. We did what we were told." Evelyn's face softened, anger melting into a different kind of resolve. "We still have Michael," she said. "We still have now." Emma put a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Paper is paper," she said. "It tells one version of a life. It does not command the future." But questions kept crowding the room. If medication had dulled Michael's reactions, could they reverse it? Would treatment now make him see? Or was time lost? They decided on therapy and truth in equal parts. Robert authorized treatments without asking about cost. He pulled in the best specialists his wealth could reach. They listened to Emma's low-technology methods and the doctor's clinical ones. They combined, not always smoothly, but they tried. Michael responded in small, stubborn ways. He watched hands better. He smiled when a familiar voice sang. He flinched less at sudden noises. The chores and rituals became a kind of liturgy, daily practice that remapped his world. One night, while the city hummed beyond the windows, Lila returned. She came with a confession that had been folded and kept. "There were unsent reports," she said. "Documents that should have gone to families but were never mailed. Someone said it would alarm them. I kept one." She handed a folder to Sophia. The folder contained a small note tied with twine. The handwriting was neat and old-fashioned. To the parents, "If you notice delayed responses, seek therapy immediately. Do not wait." Sophia hugged the folder to her chest like a relic. Tears came fast, hot and raw. "Why hide this?" she whispered. "Who thought they had the right?" Lila swallowed. "Fear," she said. "And something worse, thinking money could fix everything." Robert's face crumpled for a moment. Then his features set like iron. He rose and looked at the window, at the outline of the city he ruled, and felt suddenly powerless. Evelyn pressed a fresh cloth to Michael's forehead. "We will teach him," she said, small and bright. "We have time." Emma smiled, a kind of tired, triumphant smile. "Truth arrived late," she said. "But it arrived." They leaned into the work with a new intensity. They read manuals and ancient lullabies. They measured progress with patience, not charts. Sometimes triumph felt like nothing more than Michael opening his palm to take a toy. Other times it was a long scream of frustration that left everyone breathless. Then, one afternoon, Michael grabbed a sunbeam. He had been playing with a wooden horse when a shaft of sunlight slipped through the conservatory glass. For a suspended moment, the light touched his skin. He froze. His face softened. He turned his head toward the warmth, as if sensing a presence. Sophia watched, disbelief and hope colliding. "Did he feel it?" she breathed. Evelyn held her breath. "He's feeling something." And for a fleeting second, the world held its breath with them. Will that brief touch of sunlight become a bridge to sight, or was it just a tender accident? They called it the day of the sunbeam in hushed tones, like a holy thing. Michael had touched the light with a small, searching hand. After that, days seemed to hum with possibility. The house rearranged itself around small rituals: morning light hour, bell hour, Story Hour. Each hour had its own small ceremony, practiced until the movements felt familiar. Sophia slept less. She watched Michael the way parents watch a flame. Robert moved among rooms with a slower gait, less brittle. He started leaving a small toy on Michael's pillow each night, a quiet offering. Evelyn kept a journal now, neat entries of what worked and when. Emma taught them the patience of practice, that learning is not a staircase but a forest path with hidden clearings. One morning, they decided to test something new. Emma had a small box of colored fabrics, scarlet, amber, teal, and a soft gray. She did not expect Michael to see, but she expected him to react to texture, temperature, and the stories each color carried. She wrapped a scarf in velvet and placed it where the light could touch it. "Tell him a story," Emma said to Robert. "Tell him what red smells like." Robert blinked, then smiled in a way that surprised Sophia. He sat and spoke to his son in small sentences about red. How it was the color of his mother's lips when she laughed, of apples, of warmth. He did not speak like a businessman. He spoke like a father practicing a new language. Michael's fingers grazed the velvet. He inhaled. The room felt very still. Then he reached. Not blindly. Not the habitual flailing of a newborn. He extended his hand with intention and brushed the fabric. A small sigh escaped him. His face, for a moment, was open, receptive like a window. Sophia's heart hurt in an old and new way. "What did he do?" she asked, scarcely breathing. Evelyn met her eyes. "He felt and he recognized," she said. "That is the first step." They repeated the exercise with the other colors. With amber, Michael's cheeks pinked. With teal, he hummed. The gray made him quiet, thoughtful. It was as if each shade carried its own small music and he was learning to listen. But then came fear again. What if this was a false dawn? What if a stumble would plunge them back into numbness? The possibility of losing progress felt like walking a tightrope above an abyss. Emma held a small mirror to Michael's chest that evening and then put it near his eyes. It reflected no colors but it reflected his movement. He watched himself, mouthing a sound he had not made before, a soft, delighted coo. "Is that laughter?" Sophia whispered, and then laughed herself, the sound of a woman who had come to terms with miracles. They decided to take him outside. The world beyond the glass had textures their house could not replicate. Grass prickling at little knees, the sun warming the cheek, the smell of wet earth. They wrapped him in a small blue blanket and carried him down to the garden where the trees made a cathedral of leaves. "Look," Robert said and pointed. He did not expect Michael to see, but he hoped the gesture would resonate. A butterfly drifted by, fragile wings beating. Michael's head tilted. He reached toward the light that filtered through the butterfly's wings. His little fingers brushed air and then, in a motion so quick it startled them all, he craned forward as if chasing something he had seen in a dream. A breeze lifted the blanket and for a heartbeat the sunlight hit his face full on. Michael's eyes narrowed. He blinked. The world stretched and something shifted. Sophia felt a strain in her chest that hurt like joy. Robert's mouth dropped open silently. Evelyn laughed, a small sharp sound of pure relief. Emma closed her eyes and let out a slow breath like a person letting water go. It did not happen all at once. It was not a cinematic reveal in a hospital corridor. But over the next week, the changes gathered momentum. Michael tracked moving objects more reliably. He smiled at faces, sometimes with a lag but with unmistakable recognition. He began to reach for colored fabrics with intent. He followed voices with a tilt of his head and eyes that seemed to be learning the map of the world. Neighbors noticed. Reporters did not. This story did not belong to headlines anymore. It belonged to the small, stubborn world they had built, a world of practices that irked the clinical minds yet softened the edges of reality. One night, after weeks of progress, Robert sat alone in the conservatory. He watched the moon lace silver over the leaves. He thought of the papers, the mistakes, the apologies, the money that could not buy back time. He thought of Michael's tiny hand in his. A question budded and grew like a flower in his chest. Had their wealth been a barrier at times? Had it made people assume answers, hide truths? He could not shake the sense that the house had learned something hard. Sophia joined him with Michael asleep on her shoulder. She looked at Robert and asked, quietly, "Do you think he will remember this? The waiting. The silence." Robert looked at Michael's peaceful face and then at Sophia. "He will remember the hands that taught him," he said. "Not the mistakes. The hands." Evelyn stood in the doorway, and for the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself a small dream. "When he grows," she said softly, "what will he choose to do with the world he was given and the silence he survived?" They all pondered that, each in their own way. At the very end, as the house settled and the moon made a silver path across the floor, Sophia turned to the camera of the mind and asked the question that would make viewers pause and think. If you discovered that a loved one's misfortune was tied to someone's mistake, would you forgive the error and focus on healing, or demand answers and justice first? What would you do? Share your thoughts below.